Hello again everyone, and welcome to the long-awaited video number 14 of my Linux Commands for Beginners series. And as promised in this video, I'm going to be getting into permissions. And this is something that can confuse beginners. So I decided to take as much time as I can on this and spread this between as many videos as I can. In the previous video I mentioned that it would take like 3 to 5 videos to do this, and it very well might, but maybe more. I'm not quite sure how many videos it's going to take. But I don't want to go over too much in each video, so I don't want to confuse you and overwhelm you. So permissions is definitely one of the most important things to learn, and I want to make sure that I get these concepts over to you and that you understand everything. So now before I get started, you might notice that the terminal window looks different in this video than it did in all the other ones. And the reason why is because I was using a Latitude D630 laptop in the previous videos, and that one only had 1 gig of RAM and a really slow hard drive, and it made recording videos a chore. Now, rather than upgrade it, I recently got rid of it, and I'm using a Lenovo T420 laptop now with 16 gigs of RAM and a solid-state drive. So slowdown should definitely be a thing of the past. Now, the reason why it looks different though is because I'm using Linux Mint now instead of Ubuntu, and that's not a big deal though, because all the commands in Ubuntu work in Linux Mint and vice versa for the most part, because Linux Mint is Ubuntu with a bunch of customizations thrown on top of it. So that's why my terminal window here looks different. And the colorization is different. The command prompt is green, and then the working directory here is blue. So, and again, colorization, as I mentioned in a previous video, is a distribution specific customization. So just ignore that. All the commands are going to be the same and are compatible, so you don't have to relearn anything or anything like that. So just wanted to get that out of the way. So basically, in this video, I'm going to go over reading permissions, and this is the most important thing. The most important thing being learning how to look at a file or folder and understand what the permissions mean, what you are and are not allowed to do with each of the permissions. And this is the most important video when it comes to my mini-series on permissions, because understanding permissions is most of the battle. So you definitely want to pay special attention to this video. And if anything confuses you, I could make a follow-up video if you guys want after this one, and I could go over any of the concepts again, I don't mind. So anyway, now as I mentioned in a previous video, if you type the ls command, you don't see the permissions. So, and that's if you type the ls command by itself. So what you want to do is ls-l for a long listing, and what that'll do is it'll allow you to see the permissions, which is basically the first entry here for every line item when you do a listing. So, and as I mentioned before, the first character will either be a hyphen, or for a regular file, or D if it's a directory. Now, as you notice here, I only have one directory. It's called test, and it's colored blue. That's very common in a lot of distributions to colorize folders as blue. So you probably might be seeing blue for your folders on your side as well, but you might not, because again, colorization is a distribution specific customization, so everything might be white. So I want to reiterate the fact that the first character, if it's a hyphen, it's a file, and if it's a D, it's a folder. So that way you could tell the difference even if your distribution doesn't colorize the output of the ls command. So just want to make sure you know that. Now after that, we have a bunch of characters here. We have R's, W's, X's, and hyphens. So what the heck does all that mean? So I'm going to go over that right now before I actually go over the entire permission string. So R basically means read, W means write, and X means execute. So anytime you see an X, regardless of where it is, it means execute. Anytime you see R, it means read. Anytime you see W, it means write. And that's true across the board here. So read and write and execute, basically that means something different if it's a file, and it means something different if it's a folder. So first I'm going to go over what read, write, and execute means in relation to files, because that's actually the easiest thing to talk about. So again, in relation to files, read means that you can open the file, meaning, for example, if it's a text file, you can display the contents of the text file. Read by itself doesn't mean that you can change it. Read only means that you can open the file and read its contents. Write is probably self-explanatory. Write means that you can make changes to the file and save over top of the original with a new version. So if you have only read, that means you can read it, but you can't change it. But if you have read and write together, that means that you can not only open the file but make changes. So as you see here, R and W, read and write, means that this group, or the first part, I'll go over what the groups mean, but basically means you can read the file and make changes to it. So execute is a little interesting, especially if you're coming from Windows. X means that you are allowed to execute the file as if it were a program. So binary programs will naturally have an X for execute, meaning you can run the program. But if it's a text file, you may think, well, why would a text file have that? Well, text files can be run as a program too. Now the reason for that is something called scripting. Administrators will constantly make scripts that inside, and it's basically a text file, but inside the text file is a list of commands, and then the administrator would then make the text file, give it execute permissions, and when executed, the text file, or basically the command line interpreter or your Linux terminal, will execute all the commands included inside the text file one by one. And you have to have the execute permissions in order for that to be a possibility. So that's read, write, and execute for files. Again, read, you can read and open the file. Write, you can make changes to it. And execute, you can run it as if it were a program. Now, in relation to directories, though, the read, write, and execute means something completely different. And this might confuse you, but I think it'll make sense if I explain it good enough, and hopefully I do. In relation to directories, read means that you can list the contents inside the folder. Basically means that you could execute the ls command against the folder and see what's in it, see what items are inside. That's what read does. Now, write means that you could add new items into the folder, remove existing ones, or rename existing files or folders inside the directory. So, write means that you can add, remove contents, and what have you. Now, execute, this is where it gets a little confusing. Execute means that you can cd into the directory. It means you can enter the change directory command and you can change your working directory to be in that folder. So that could be a little confusing to you, so I'll try to explain the difference. Now, read, as I mentioned, means that you can list the contents inside the folder, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can enter into the folder. Likewise, having the execute permission means that you can enter inside the folder, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can view what's inside the folder. So that could be a little confusing, but think of a folder as a box for a moment, and it's a box full of stuff. If you have the read permission, that means that you can open the lid, you can look down, and you can see what's inside the box. Execute means that you could actually physically climb into the box, but it doesn't mean that you can look down while you're inside the box and see what's inside. So if you have read and execute both, that means that not only can you look inside the box, but you can also climb inside and see what's there as well. So again, hopefully, I know that might be a confusing analogy, hopefully it wasn't lame, but again, read means that you can list what's inside the folder. Write means that you can add, remove, or rename contents inside the folder. And execute means that you can change your working directory to be that directory. So that's what permissions mean for folders. So okay, so then the only thing left to talk about is you have several reads, several writes, several executes listed here. So to go over that, the permission string is broken down into 4 categories. The first category is only one character. That's the one that could either be a dash or a hyphen if it's a file, or a D if it's a directory. Now there's other things that could be in this first category, but I'm not going to go over those yet. So just assume that the only possibility is a D or a hyphen until I get to the more advanced stuff. And then next, each subsequent group is broken down into 3s. So here, these 3 characters, that's group 2. And then here's group 3. And then finally, group 4. So the first group of 3 here is for the user. And that basically means the owner of the file. So here you can see the owner of this file has read, write, and execute, has everything. Now the second group here category is group. Basically this category here means that the group that owns the file, and yes, a file can be owned by a user and a group. Members of the group will have read, but won't have write because that's a hyphen, and will have execute. So anytime you see a hyphen in the permission string, it means that that category doesn't have that permission. So this one is missing the W, as you see here. So you'll know that the group has read and execute only. Now the last group here is other, and you'll also hear it referred to as world. And basically what other means is everybody else. So as you can tell, the group doesn't really matter if they have read and execute, because everyone else has read and execute. So pretty much read and execute across the board. So members of the group have read and execute, and then everyone else has read and execute as well. So that's how you tell the difference there, and that's what each of these little subcategories mean here. So again, user, group, and world or other. And now you'll see that I have my username here and then root listed, and I'll explain what that means. This category here, which is the third item on the list, is the user account that owns that file. So you can see my user account owns this file. Members of the root, or actually, excuse me, it's owned by the group root. So basically anybody who's a member of whatever group owns a file gets these permissions right here. So anybody who's a member of root gets read and execute only and doesn't get write. Now everyone else is everybody besides these two. It's besides the user, besides the group. Anybody else has read and execute. So groups are an important concept in Linux because if you have, for example, a folder that you want all of your accounting team to be able to access, you could create a group called accounting and then make your accounting team members all a member of that group. And then anybody who's a member of that group will automatically have these permissions. So for example, you could give everyone in accounting read, write, and execute, and everyone in world nothing. So that means no one can access the file except for the owner. And then if this was read, write, and execute, members of the group would also be able to read and write changes to the files in there as well. And that's basically what groups are. And I'll be going over groups in the next video actually, so that you know how to create groups and remove groups and things like that. But that's basically in a nutshell what the permissions mean. And one of the differences between Linux and Windows is in Windows you can actually have a file or folder that can be accessed by several groups. So you can list a bunch of groups that have access to that one folder or file, but not in Linux. Linux, a file can be owned by only one user, as you see here, and it can be owned only by one group. So for example, if you wanted both your sales team and your accounting team to have their own groups and both of those groups be able to access this file, you can't. You have to choose one because you can only have one group. Now Linux has what's called access control lists, which allow you to have multiple groups or give multiple groups access to a file or a folder, but I'm not going to get into that until much later. So for right now, just assume that the file or folder can be owned by one user and it can be owned by just one group. Then the rest of these permissions, I'm not going to be going over these numbers right now, but of course you have the modification time when the file or folder was last modified. That's pretty self-explanatory. So anyway, that's all for reading permissions. What I'd like you to do is just have a look around your file system, just CD into several different folders, and look at the permission string for those files and folders, and just practice reading the difference until you know that you got it down. And you can watch this video a second time because sometimes watching it the second time will help you. Once you know how to read permissions and you know what everything means that I've went over, then you are ready to move on to the next video. So I'll see you then.